Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. Our analysis of gender identity ideology has been consistent since Janice Raymond's The Transsexual Empire, written in 1979. So we were not surprised when this new attack on women came along, and we haven't changed our analysis. In 2018, we wrote a declaration on women's sex-based rights, which lays out our position. It's nearly 7,000 words long, and it's been signed by 39,190 people from 160 countries and is supported by 542 organisations. Our programme today is Sheila Jeffreys is going to talk about the sexual harassment of transgenderism in the workplace. And then we're going to hear from Zurine Ojeda from Spain, who's going to speak about Spanish feminism against the transgender lobby. And then we'll have country reports from a few different countries. I'm really pleased to welcome our first speaker, Sheila Jeffreys. She's from the UK and Australia. She's a radical lesbian, feminist author and activist, and the title of the talk is The Sexual Harassment of Transgenderism in the Workplace. So over to you, Sheila.
The talk that I'm going to give today concerns the way that women experience the fetishistic behavior of men who do what they call their gender expression in the workplace. It consists of the submission I made to a call for evidence by the UN Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Reem Al-Salim, on what she calls sex-based violence against women and girls. I am actually delighted, of course, that this term, sex-based violence, sex-based generally, is now being used instead of the dreadful term gender violence, which has been used generally in recent years and has been actually sort of unintelligible. Genders are not violence to each other, and gender can't be violent. So yes, so this is a submission to a call for evidence on sex-based violence against women and girls. In the call for evidence, Reem Al-Salim asks several questions that we are invited to respond to. So the one that I chose to respond to was something called Key Question 3, and it says, are there emerging forms or evolving dynamics of sex-based violence against women and girls that call for a deeper and more nuanced understanding of such sex-based forms of violence? The emerging form that I'm addressing here is the sex-based sexual harassment of women in the workplace that is caused by the expression of gender identity or other forms of fetishistic behavior by men. This is new, and I'm going to talk about it. And I'm interested in making sure that we all have a language to address this, because it's becoming a more and more important problem. So I thought that the definition of sexual harassment I should use is from the UN, and it's the United Nations System Model Policy on Sexual Harassment. And I think it fits very well with what I'm going to say about men's gender expression. So it says, sexual harassment is any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature that results in physical, psychological, or sexual harm that might reasonably be expected or be perceived to cause offence or humiliation when such conduct interferes with work, is made a condition of employment, or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. And it adds, in assessing the reasonableness of expectations or perceptions, the perspective of the person who is the target of the conduct shall be considered. Well, women are the targets of the conduct, so it is important that we are able to speak about this. And as I go through, I'll show how this behavior by men fits with all these different aspects of the United Nations system model policy on sexual harassment. First of all, I'm going to talk about the form of sexual harassment that is men's gender expression emerged, because it's really becoming quite obvious now. So I'm going to do a bit of the history of transvestism here, which I know most of you know very well, so forgive me for the repetition. But I needed to do this for the submission because this history may not be known, and we know it is not known to some in UN circles. So I had to introduce this. So until the last 2 decades, men with an interest in pretending to be women have been classified by sexologists, the sexologists of sex, as transvestites. Transvestism has been understood as a form of sexual fetishism, in which men gain masochistic sexual excitement from adopting what they see as the behavior of the subordinate class of women. This behavior in earlier decades is likely to have been carried out in secluded locations, bathrooms in front of the mirror, hotel rooms, specialized weekends away, specialized clubs. There was not sufficient social acceptance for these men to engage in their fetish behavior in public and in the workplace. In recent decades, however, there's been a movement to reshape the popular and scientific understanding of transvestism, to erase the knowledge that it is a sexual paraphilia. In its place, the idea has been promoted that the men who do this are a special kind of person in possession of a female brain sex that makes them into women. Many sexologists have changed their mind and taken up the new ideology, or at least not questioned it. The sexologists who have not changed their understanding of the behavior, however, and continue to understand it as sexual, have changed their terminology and are now more likely to call transvestism autogynephilia, which is the love of the woman in themselves. In the age of the internet, the pornography, the very numerous websites, the burgeoning industry and support groups that promote and create this paraphilia have greatly increased in volume. The men with this paraphilia began to campaign in the 1990s to be seen as an excluded minority group with a right to express what they called their gender identity, which I now argue is causing huge problems in the form of sexual harassment in the workplace. Their campaigning work resulted in their practice now being generally seen as requiring respect and protection in public places, including legislatures, women's sports, workplaces. The sexual satisfaction they once gained from what was called being dressed in front of the bathroom mirror or in a fetish club can now be gained from dressing up in front of and gaining affirmation from women in many environments. The workplace is one of the stages on which the fetish behavior can now be acted out. Women co-workers have become the unwilling participants in the men's sexual fantasy. Though women are sexually harassed in a variety of venues by men, both with and without gender identities, I'm concentrating on the workplace here because discrimination against women in the workplace and the destruction of women's rights at work are well recognized in law and policy as serious obstacles to women's equality. Also, workplace sexual harassment usually offers remedies that other forms of harassment do not. Unfortunately, the new form of sexual harassment that I'm addressing here, that carried out by men who are expressing their gender, is not yet included in what is understood to be sexual harassment at work. And that's what I want to have happen. I want this form of harassment to be included. Now, the form of men's behavior, this form of men's behavior fits into the UN Women's definition of sexual harassment because it is overwhelmingly, quote, unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature, which men now practice in the workplace to women's detriment. And it causes, quote, physical, psychological, and sexual harm, and offense or humiliation. There are 3 forms of this variety of sexual harassment that I will examine here. The first is of that of men expressing their gender in places within workplaces that have traditionally been single sex in order to protect women's dignity and privacy, such as bathrooms and change rooms. The second is that of women workers such as police officers or prison officers, having to treat men with gender identities as if they are women, as in being required to strip search male offenders or prisoners. The third is that of women workers being required to work alongside and affirm male co-workers who decide to express their gender identity in the workplace. For instance, simply being required to sit next to a man who is in a position to require that the woman call him special names and flaunt his sexual fetish in front of her while she is working. Now, I'm going to look at the form that is first in my list. In the UK, there have been two notable cases of the first form, where female nurses have made complaints to their employers over having to share intimate spaces with these men. In one case in March 2024, 8 nurses in County Durham in the UK complained to their employer that a man who had not transitioned and looked very male was accessing the space in which the nurses had to change out of their scrubs twice a day. Senior hospital employees told the nurses that they needed to be re-educated. On receiving no support, they went on to sue the hospital trust in June 2024 for sexual harassment and sex discrimination because of the policy which allowed these men to use their women's changing rooms. This case has not yet come to court or been decided. Now, then there was another case, a similar case in Scotland. A nurse took her employers to an employment tribunal because she was forced to share a change room with a male doctor. Her employers told her that she could change in a cupboard. The tribunal for this nurse, Sandra Peggy, has been taking place in the last couple of weeks. So we have quite a lot of information and it's really been in the news. Here we have the two persons in this tribunal. We've got Sandy Peggy, who is the nurse, and Beth Upton is the man who is the male doctor. The case of Sandy Peggy has gripped Scotland. Peggy is a nurse who had worked for 30 years for the NHS Scotland when the male doctor, who calls himself Beth Upton, decided to pretend to be a woman and use the women's changing room. Upton did not have a gender recognition certificate. He was just a man who decided to imitate a woman without even the fig leaf of legitimacy that the ridiculous Gender Recognition Act could provide. Peggy found it disturbing to have to share a changing room with a man. On 2 occasions, she simply left when she found him there. And this annoyed him because, of course, the point for him was being able to embarrass and distress a woman. On another occasion on which she was having a flooding period, which happens quite commonly to women going through the menopause, and was afraid she had bled through her scrubs, she tried to use the changing room. On finding Upton in occupation, she told him he should not be there. Shortly after this, Upton made a formal complaint against Peggy that she had engaged in an act of harassment constituted of a hate incident. She was suspended on the grounds that he had the right to use the women's change room. In fact, that is not the case. And it was the legal responsibility of the hospital to provide changing rooms separated by sex. She sued Upton and the NH board for several claims of harassment and discrimination. And for the last 2 weeks, the tribunal, as I say, has been taking place. It should be over by now as a result of some withholding of evidence and the need to call more witnesses. However, it is been delayed and has to reconvene in July. So she has the punishment of having to suffer this harassment and hostile behavior towards her, of having to be in the courtroom for several more months. Now, Peggy has become a hero to many women, and when she went into court on her most recent appearance, she was piped in, i.e. a piper played his traditional Scottish instrument to celebrate her entrance. Her case is so clearly unfair that it's caused some politicians who had been previously complicit to come out and denounce what is being done to her. There seems little doubt that she will win, but she's already been punished by having to undergo the ordeal. In the last week of the tribunal, she found that Dr. Upton and her employers intended to continue their pursuit of her. NHS Fife scheduled a conduct hearing to examine allegations against her of misconduct, failures of patient care, and misgendering, which could lead to her dismissal. And this hearing as well has been postponed. But the bullying doesn't end there. It goes on and on, really. A group set up to support the doctor has reported the Scottish Daily Express, a newspaper which was brave enough to describe him as a man, throughout the tribunal, to the police for targeted harassment in the form of misgendering. So the newspapers are apparently not allowed, I think they will win actually, but not allowed to say that a man is a man, even in a situation like this. More has come out in the last couple of days, which is that it has been discovered that the NHS in the UK allows a male doctor who decides he wants to play at being a woman for a while to change his name and his NHS number so that on all official records he becomes a completely new person. And Beth Upton did this in 2023. So it's not possible for patients or anybody to look up a man's record and work out who he is and what he has done in the past. And there's now, I think this will change because there's considerable discomfort about the fact that a man is able to do that. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the second type of sexual harassment, which concerns women workers being required to engage in intimate touching of a man's body under the pretense that he is really a woman because he has a gender identity. In early 2023, female prison officers working at a men's prison in Scotland, who had to strip search male prisoners, complained after they were ordered to carry out this procedure on a very violent man who had a gender identity and intact genitalia. The requirement to strip search men with gender identities was later repealed. The same problem arises in relation to female prison officers being required to search male prisoners with gender identities. And I'm sure we will find that in many other situations, this problem of forcing women to touch men intimately takes place. Now, the third kind of sexual harassment that men with gender identities introduce into the workplace is simply their presence, which is extremely unwelcome for many women. In the case of a similar behavior, now most usually called blackface, in which white people black up and mock black people, the behavior has become socially unacceptable. It's now seen as racist and as insulting to persons from ethnic minorities, and it would not be acceptable in the workplace. But of course, that realization has not arrived yet in relation to pretending to be women. The expression of gender identities by men, however, is not seen as acceptable, is not only seen as acceptable in the workplace, but the welcoming of it is very generally imposed upon other workers by workplace codes of practice. Women workers are required to welcome behavior in which men are sexually excited by imitating what they see as the expression of their internal feminine gender. The transvestites are likely to have their excitement enhanced by getting co-workers, to affirm them through use of their female names and pronouns, and even by discussion of what they see as their femaleness. They might, for instance, wish to discuss menstruation. This happens. These men do like to discuss menstruation with women and pretend that menstruation is something that they do. And that is obviously, very obviously, a sexual harassment. These men may imitate women's biology, and that's a very significant part, in fact, of autogynephilia. This may cause women distress and discomfort from the men's behavior, such that it should definitely be included in the definition of sexual harassment. However, the women may not only be unable to complain about the behavior, but may be required by workplace policies to be welcoming of it. Now, alongside the increase in men's interest in transvestism, there's been an increase in men's interest in other forms of paraphilia and fetish behavior. And it is now starting to happen that men want to engage in these forms of behavior in the workplace too. Men with a paraphilia are likely to have more than one. Men with gender identities, for instance, may also have the paraphilia of age regression, in which they imitate female babies or schoolgirls. So they may wish to come to work as a schoolgirl. None have done this exactly yet. But as we shall see, they do want to wear nappies. All forms of men's fetishism now have extensive niches in the pornography industry and in support communities on the internet. Forms of behavior that were once known about only from obscure articles in sexology journals are now being increasingly practiced in public, including in the workplace. And over the last decade, male fetishes have gained confidence about expressing their fetish identities in the workplace. They've been able to organize through their online meetup groups about how to express themselves in public. The fetish behavior that is best known is that of pretending to be women, and that's gained great acceptability. But other more unusual fetishes are now intruding into public spaces, including the workplace. For instance, male naturists get sexual excitement from two perversions: indecent exposure, showing their penises to women and girls, and scopophilia, getting excited by seeing women and girls naked. And they have difficulty getting women to join their organizations or take part in their practice because, of course, women don't have those perversions. But they are coming out into the public world increasingly in the last few years and creating problems for women in the workplace. As far back as 2017, the Sydney Dance Company in Australia had 3 nude nights when the performers and the audience were nude. Presumably there were women working there. More recently, museums like Dorchester Museum in the UK in 2024 and art galleries are increasingly holding nudist nights. In terms of sexual harassment, the female staff are likely to be affected by all of this, either having to be naked to get the work or to act as an audience for the men's fetish behavior. Now, I want to talk in more detail about the men's fetish, which is nappy fetishism. In December 2023, in a children's play space in Lancing in Sussex, which is a coastal town just near where I live, there was a night for nappy fetishists. And this is a description of it in the media. A mum is horrified after discovering that a soft play area used by her kids has been taken over by adults dressed as babies for parties. The woman came across an advert on the Fet Life, that is Fetish Life website, for events at the Wild Wonderland Indoor Play Centre in Lancing, West Sussex. One recent meetup was open to age players, so it could be men, could pretend to be little girls. So littles, I don't know what so littles are, and I haven't looked them up. Middles, these are presumably different age ranges they imitate. Carers, so they can bring along their wives who are persuaded to prepare for them. So sometimes wives have to change nappies, for instance. Mummies, daddies, siblings, furries, kittens, puppies, their handlers, and any wet-only adult baby diaper lover. I presume this means that only diaper lovers who may pee into the diapers are acceptable. They shouldn't be intending to shit into the diapers, although very often in very many places they do. So nappy or diaper fetishism support groups contain much discussion of how these men choose to express their perversion in the workplace. Wearing nappies to work and soiling them in the workplace are common themes on the websites of nappy fetishist communities. There have also been several reports in the media of men pretending to be female babies, demanding that female workers, carers, for instance, university lecturers, psychiatrists, affirm their fetish or change their soiled nappies in the workplace. This is a young man from West Virginia who was covered in the British media because he found himself unemployed as a result of his nappy fetishism. He said, acting like a baby gives off a very calm, relaxing and safe vibe, but his lifestyle has caused problems in his professional life. Currently unemployed, he is constantly in and out of jobs and has been fired by previous employers for being childish. Speaking to Metro UK, Damien said, diapers are very convenient, comfortable and cute. It's a very nice lifestyle and I wouldn't want to do anything else. There we are. There is Damien showing how he likes to be. And of course, he wants to be able to do this in the workplace. Presumably, he'd wear a pair of trousers. But what happens with nappy fetishes is they tend to show the back of the nappy just over the top of the trousers so that everybody's aware of what they're doing when they're in the workplace. There are plentiful resources online for men who see themselves as part of the adult baby community, which discuss the delights and problems of wearing nappies in the workplace. Adrian Surley, for instance, is a nappy fetishist whose detailed blog and discussion page is online. Adrian says, I can absolutely guarantee you that 80% of people who tried on an adult nappy would enjoy the feeling or not mind it. Obviously, it would take an adjustment period, but in the end, I can almost guarantee you that 80% at least of people would enjoy it and feel a certain level of comfort and security in them, amongst other things. So on Adrian Surley's page, men discuss questions such as whether they only pee in their nappies at work or whether they're bold enough to poo, in which case they have to take equipment with them to clean themselves up and so on and so on. On other pages, men discuss problems such as how to make themselves pee, because it's quite difficult for men to overcome nappy training and make themselves pee on demand. So that's something that where they share insights with each other. Other men talk about the problem of having sensitive skin, which is allergic to disposable nappies and so on and so on. Now, fetish behaviors in general by men should be understood as sort of fitting into the definition of sexual harassment. They are unwelcome, they cause a hostile or offensive work environment. And I have got a great deal of information and examples of the ways in which men's sexual perversions are being enabled in public places and venues, but I don't have time to talk about them all today. Now, this old chap is a civil servant. I think he was at the Home Office. So in the UK, this problem of fetish at work was illustrated by the behavior of the male civil servant with a gender identity. He's already got a gender identity, who some of his colleagues argued chose to practice his interest in BDSM through the clothing he wore at work. He had, as is so often, multiple paraphilias. You know, he's described in this case in the fetish costume as wearing fetish gear consisting of fishnet tights, low-cut corsets and chokers. But the fact that he's dressing as a woman is not significant because, you know, that's acceptable. That's seen as something which is perfectly okay. It's the fact that he went into what they called BDSM costume that is the problem. And in fact, Baroness Jenkins asked a question about this in the House of Lords. It's received a bit of attention that he was not just dressing up as a woman, ordinary fetish behavior, but going beyond that and doing BDSM. Now I want to talk about the pressure being put on women to welcome men's gender expression or fetish expression, what one might call it, in the workplace. Presently, it is only cross-dressing fetishism that is acceptable at work, where it's supported with policies and practices. At present, there's no protection for nudists or nappy fetishists, but nothing would surprise me, since these men are getting more and more privileges to do their sexual expression to or at women and girls in public places and cultural venues. Now, the UN System Policy on Sexual Harassment that we looked at earlier defines sexual harassment as behaviours which interfere with work, is made a condition of employment, or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. Increasingly, though, affirmation of the behaviour of men who express their gender identity through being welcoming and using the men's preferred sexual pronouns and names is being imposed on women by workplace codes of conduct and education and training. It's now become, I would argue, and this is part of the definition, a condition of employment in many workplaces. So women have to accept this sexual harassment. It's a condition of employment. There's an increasing academic literature on the importance of workplace policies on gender identity. That is, workplaces must always all have these policies. And they may enforce a duty on all employees to positively welcome men's gender expression. The literature argues, for instance, that men who express their female gender identity suffer minority stress, which co-workers must reduce through their affirming conduct. Failure to welcome is referred to as microaggression. We've all heard of them, haven't we? This is very naughty behavior on the part of women. So if women don't affirm, if they're not enthusiastic, this is microaggression. Even when there are TGD workplace protections available, microaggressions still occur in points not clearly outlined in the policies. Co-workers should be educated to support the men and perform acts of oppositional courage. So the women co-workers must be courageous in supporting these men and certainly not do microaggression. The research articles on how men are who are expressing their gender in the workplace feel and what should be done to help them do sometimes comment on the fact that there's no research on how anyone else in the workplace feels, particularly women, of course. It's significant that the UN definition of sexual harassment states, in assessing the reasonableness of expectations or perceptions, the perspective of the person who is the target of the conduct shall be considered. Women are not considered. They are forced with all kinds of penalties, as we have seen earlier in this talk. Because, of course, Sandy Peggy did not affirm. She did do microaggression. This is one of these articles about what has to happen in the workplace. It states that this is on non-binary workers, because presumably co-workers got to respect non-binary workers as well. Of course, there's no such thing as men who become women. It states that there are various ways non-binary workers express their gender identity at work via physical appearance and clothing, gestures and language, posture and movement, and other communication signals. So presumably women in the workplace should be looking out for the signals so that they can affirm and not do microaggressions and behave in all the ways that they're supposed to. The Human Rights Campaign, which is an organization which is influential in the promotion of gender identity rights, created an online resource in 2016 on gender identity rights in the workplace. The man who's the main speaker in the video says, gender identity rights must allow a man such as himself with an incipient beard and lipstick to go to work in one gender one day and a different gender the next. Now, this is exhausting. For women co-workers to be having to constantly affirm one day after the next men in different genders is obviously a significant problem for women in the workplace. Workplace management adopt policies to welcome men who imitate women into the workplace as a result of the volume of campaigning effort by organizations that promote what they call gender identity rights, and because they wish to avoid experiencing penalties imposed by legislation that now enshrines these rights in law. As a result, the rights of women workers to dignity and respect in the workplace suffer. Until recently, women workers had been making considerable progress in fighting for their rights at work, including freedom from sexual harassment. Now, the workplace for increasing numbers of women has become a toxic environment in which they must show affirmation towards men expressing the sexual paraphilia of transvestism or face penalties. Where this happens, the workplace becomes once again discriminatory against women in order that some men may use it as a play space for the expression of their sexual excitement. The protection of women's rights in the workplace requires the adoption of a definition of sexual harassment which includes the expression of gender identity and other forms, all forms of fetishistic behaviour by men. Thank you.
We're going to now go to our next speaker, who is Zurine Ojeda. She is from Spain. She's a feminist activist. In 2015, she founded Gafas Moradas, Purple Glasses, and she's the manager of the feminist section of El Común and writes articles. She's now the vice president of the party Feminists to Congress. And thank you so much for coming, Zurine. The title of Zurine's talk is Spanish Feminism Against the Transgender Lobby. So thank you so much, and over to you.
El Común is a digital media, like a digital diary or notice diary, who has a feminist section, and is the only media, generalist media in Spain, who gives voice to radical feminists. Okay, and now I am the vice president of a new political party, Feminists to Congress. I'll start with a brief resume of feminism in Spain in the last 50 years, because we come from a Catholic dictatorship of 40 years, where feminism was illegal, and no way we were in a Catholic country. We had nothing allowed. So when democracy came, in just a few years, we won the right to vote, the divorce, the right to work and have properties without our husband's authorization. We have now equal representation in political parties, and the abortion rights. We started in the 80s with an assumption law. We could only get an abortion if the fetus came with severe malfunctions, if we have been violated, raped, or if our lives were in risk. Only in that three cases. But in 2004, we changed to the deadline law. So now we have abortion free and almost guaranteed in all the country. Okay. This only in less than 50 years, in less than 40 years. Okay, so feminism was there, feminists we were there, and in the moment democracy erupted, I think we did a great job. I don't know if you remember this. This was 2018. 2018 was a very important year for feminism in Spain. This is the 8th of March. And this is in my city, in Bilbao, that Sheila knows, because she was here last year visiting us. This was the most massive demonstration, feminist demonstration in Spain ever. Not only this, all over the country. That year, it was an explosion of feminism in the streets. We made a national strike. Okay, only women did the strike, but it was a national strike. In Bilbao, women, we were all day in the streets, all day, shouting, singing, protesting against patriarchy all day. This picture, in fact, was taken at 1 p.m. So we were all day in the streets. In fact, I am there somewhere. So it was so big and so important this year, feminism this year, that it was the striking point for so many people who saw that feminism was becoming too big and too important in a Spanish country. And I guess this is the moment where they decided they had to break it. And they did. And in fact, they did. This is the last time feminists and women were together in Spain, fighting for feminism together, the last time. Since then, it has not been like that. At that time, we already knew what was happening in UK, in Canada, and the United States. We knew with the transgender laws, but we thought, innocent as we were, very, very innocent, that we didn't have that problem. As Kate said in the video, initially they were LGBT associations and the T came after. In Spain, that was not the case because we arrived so late to all of this, to democracy and all of these rights, that associations from the first time were LGBT. The T was always there in Spain, but it always meant transsexual people, not transgender or queer or something like that. It was just for transsexual people. We already had laws for that transsexual people from 2010, more or less. They had paid surgeries and treatments, but always for adults under strict psychiatric and psychological controls and medical controls, only for adults, okay? And we weren't aware what was coming, really. Some of us were talking about that, but people weren't aware of that. Demonstrations of 2018 were really the turning point for the transgender movement. They knew how strong we were, and they were determined to change that. We have a new political party in Congress, Podemos, translated maybe as Yes We Can or something like that. They identify themselves as left wing and feminist, and fooled many of us in that days in 2015 and so on. They also identify as the most feminist party in Spain. Okay, they took responsibility of the Ministry of Equality, but because yes, in Spain we have a Ministry of Equality that is supposed to be a feminist minister. And they started in the beginning of 2020 and they till the end of 2023. And at the same time, transgenderism appeared as the most important issue in many feminist associations. Here it was the money, okay? The money erased and appeared everywhere. Everywhere was talking about this suddenly in the feminist associations, meetings, and so on. And suddenly, it happened one thing is that everyone started to confuse the terms gender and sex. And I'm so sorry for saying this, but in part was because of how you use them or have been using them in English, okay? We know sex has been very rude for some people and they change to gender instead of that. But this is not the case, was not the case in Spain, okay? There's no problem of saying sex related to male, female, to a man and a woman, and so on. But this use of the term gender, has made many people to get very, very confused. People in the streets, people that are not into this, use them equally and don't even know the difference. And this makes very difficult because any conversation about this, we have to start it speaking about what is gender and what is sex. And it's like a Sesame Street class or something like this, but it's necessary because people in Spain is really very confused about this. All of a sudden, in almost every feminist group all over the country, appear women defending the gender self-determination as the most modern and feminist issue you could ever think of. This was the last of the last, the coolest of the cool you could be in the feminist movement. Even supposed to be intelligent and well-known radical feminists like Iranchu Valela and many others changed their minds and started to support this. In Spain, we say just follow the money, okay? But this happened, so this added more confusion to people that weren't inside feminism, okay? They weren't all of us, of course, already in 1918 and before. There were some of us saying this was nonsense. I remember Madeleine Bierns, many of us knew her on Twitter and social media. But we were clearly losing the battle those days. Podemos, this left and very feminist political party, arrived to the Ministry of Equality, and they immediately sold all their left-wing policies in exchange for the transgender law. They were a minority in the government, so they didn't have the government themselves, but they were in the government. So they sold every left-wing policies like work policies, taxes, everything in exchange of this horrible law. They never met with any radical feminist association, only with LGBTIQ plus ones, as Kate says. In Spain, we call them alphabet groups because they have so many letters, and each day they have more, so they call them the alphabet associations. There was no public debate at all, ever, in any place except from, Twitter, X, and these social nets. And finally, in February 2020, the transgender law was approved with the conformity of all the left-wing parties in the Congress and many of the right wing too. Only 2 of the right-wing parties didn't vote for that. All the rest of the Congress voted for this transgender law. We have in Spain a law that says that sex is assigned at birth. This is a law in Spain that says this. That is nonsense. This is religion. This is not science. This is not evidence. This is nothing. And this law allows anyone to change their registered sex only by expressing their will to do it. For example, tomorrow I go to the registration office and I say, now I feel like a man, and the only thing I have to do is come again in 6 months to repeat the same, and I'll have my sex changed in all my documents, in all my official documents. There's no requirement, no one. And even questioning that will be made considered against the law and punished with economical punishment around, we're speaking around £100,000 for you to, or euros or dollars for you to understand. This law, in fact, what it does is that it outlaws feminism in Spain, because gender is one of the main tools of oppression that women suffer. One of the main tools the patriarchy uses to prosecute women. So if gender is now in the law and is protected by law, feminism is in fact illegal. Okay, that's the law we have here in Spain. By this time, 2020 and before, all the media were in. TV programs, films, series, everything. Everything was pro-transgenderism, and everyone thought that was feminist. Okay, because the party and the government who has made that law said that they were the most feminist government in history. So everyone thinks this is what feminism says. Okay, there are is always some hope. At the beginning, where all this started to blow in society back in 2018, radical feminist voices, we were still very few, but not in silence. Never, never. We kept on speaking in social media and in feminist meetings and demonstrations, and with the consequences you all know: verbal and physical violence against us, social cancellation, loss of jobs, and this goes on until now, until this moment. But we are more and more and more each day. We want to think we are waking up people from this nightmare and from this religion, because this is a religion, not science-based. You have to have faith in what people say. If I say now I am a man, you have to make a faith act to believe that. So what is the situation now? We have the law, and we have no expectations of repealing it in the short term. The only possibility is that the extreme right-wing parties win the next elections. So this is extremely also negative perspective for feminists. Anyway, any option is bad for women. Any option we have now in this country. Still, radical feminism is still banned in big media. We don't appear, we are not giving voices in any TV program or any radio program or in newspapers, nothing. We are ignored, absolutely ignored. And if someone puts some speech or any woman speaks a little in a program, like last week, Tassia Aranguez talked in a public TV program about women in sports and trans women, male, okay, in women sports, saying that it was not fair and this shouldn't be. And there has been an authentic earthquake in social media and in all the TV programs and so on, calling her TERF, transphobe, bigot, hate speech. Well, the attack has been massive against her. So we are still being cancelled and prosecuted for telling the truth, okay? Many of us. Yesterday, Lidia Falcón went to present a book in a public library in Madrid, and the public library said they wouldn't do it because hate speech and so on. But our pressure made the public library change their mind, and finally the presentation of the book was made yesterday, full of women So we have little victories in that because we are being more and more each time. And just an idea, we don't have J.K. Rowling in Spain, but maybe we can borrow her for a while. Maybe you can lend her to us, I don't know, for some months, 1 year or so. So women with money and power and social projection in our country, or they are pro-transgenderism, or they are not interested at all in feminism itself. So we don't have a woman with that projection here, no? But it's what we have. On the other hand, these were the bad things, okay? On the other hand, almost each day we have a new group or association of radical feminists. We are growing. We are growing each day, and that's a reality. We are still few of us, but growing each day. We even have our first LGB association, which is very important that LGB groups are with us. We are starting to be enough to make our own true feminist demonstrations in many cities and towns in March the 8th. This year we are having our own demonstration in Madrid, in Barcelona, and in other many cities throughout the country. So we are starting to recover our spaces in the streets. It's very important for us. We know will be some physical aggressions, but we are aware. And we have a new feminist party, Feminists to Congress, with which we have run in the European elections, okay? This, we think from Spain, is very important. We always say feminism always says everything is politic, no? So we think it's very important to have a political force that represents us, that represents women and our interests, to force other political parties to pay attention to women and to what we are saying, because we have tried for many, many years to work inside those political parties, obviously in the left-wing parties, of course. We have tried from the inside to force them to be feminists and to work for feminism for women, but with no result. They are not interested in feminism. It's the last dot in the papers, and they are not willing to do anything for us. So we have to take a step forward and make our own political party. And it would be very interesting to have them in other countries, especially in Europe in this case. So we could make a force together and empower together and force governments and even the European Union together. As we say in Spanish, feminism or barbarity. There's no other option. So thank you so, so much for your kind attention.
This week, WDI USA is pleased to announce that this year's national convention, Growing the Women's Liberation Movement, will take place in Indianapolis, Indiana, on September 19th through the 21st. As a Midwesterner, I am particularly excited about this event. We also published a statement that articulates our strong opposition to the NCAA's February 2025 participation policy for transgender student athletes. Our view is that the new policy is out of alignment with Title IX, the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, and both the Executive Order Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports and Executive Order 14168 Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. And our statement urges the NCAA to formulate one that is. Virtually all GC feminist groups, including Icons and XXXY Athletics, are in alignment with our statement. Relatedly, on February 12th, Icons reported that just after the NCAA banned athletes marked male on their birth records from women's competitions, governors moved to cut the time required to change gender markers on birth certificates to as little as 3 business days. Only 6 states prohibit changes entirely. On this same topic, the Wall Street Journal recently published an article by Colin Wright and Ilya Shapiro advocating that Trump issue a new EO requiring states to maintain original birth certificates for federal purposes. As he says on X, sex in humans is immutable, and so documents that reflect a person's sex should also be immutable. Colin's tweet also connects to a video of Bill Bach, the Icons attorney for female athletes suing the NCAA, testifying in support of Indiana Bill HB 1041, which seeks to expand the state's previous ban on boys participating in girls' K-12 sports to college athletics. Quoting Colin, the video exposes the widespread problem of states allowing people to secure their sex by issuing new birth certificates that reflect their gender identity. Last Tuesday, the Department of Education sent a letter to the NCAA and the National Federation of State High School Associations, the NFHS, urging them to restore to female athletes the records, titles, awards, and recognitions misappropriated by males competing in female categories. And on Wednesday, the department's Office for Civil Rights, OCR, announced investigations into the Minnesota State High School League and the California Interscholastic Federation, both of which publicly announced their intentions to abide by state law as it relates to girls' and women's sports in violation of federal anti-discrimination laws. Both state laws allow athletes to participate on teams based on an individual's subjective gender identity rather than their sex, even though sex is the basis for Title IX protections. The press release further asserts that state laws do not override federal anti-discrimination laws, and these entities and their member schools remain subject to Title IX and its implementing regulations. Last week, I mentioned the Lambda Legal and ACLU-backed lawsuit filed on behalf of pro-gender identity ideology organizations PFLAG, GLAD, and a group of families with confused kids against Trump's Protecting Children and Defending Women EOs, which the suit asserts are unlawful and unconstitutional. On February 13th, a federal judge in Maryland granted plaintiffs' request for a temporary restraining order in the case. The ruling, in effect for 14 days, essentially puts Trump's directive on hold nationwide while the case proceeds, though it could also be extended. And on the 14th, a federal judge in Seattle temporarily blocked enforcement of Trump's Protecting Children EO in the case brought by Democrat attorneys general from the states of Washington, Minnesota, and Oregon, along with 3 Washington doctors, who argue that the executive order violates equal rights protections, the separation of powers, and states' powers to regulate what is not specifically delegated to the federal government. Attorney Glenna Goldis recently posted a detailed thread on X discussing the news that GLAD Law, the ACLU of New Hampshire, and multinational law firm Goodman Proctor have moved to amend a suit originally filed last August on behalf of male soccer players Parker Terrell and Iris Turmel against a New Hampshire state law that mandates sports be segregated by sex in order to challenge Trump's EO protecting single-sex sports. Her breakdown of the complaint is as hilarious as it is informative and definitely worth a read. And finally, in response to Trump's Defending Women directive, the National Park Service has made some welcome changes to its website for the Stonewall National Monument, A park and visitor center in New York commemorating the 1969 Stonewall riot, a pivotal moment in the gay rights movement. While still filled with information about the uprising, the words transgender and queer have been deleted. Additionally, the letters T and Q were cut from various references to the LGBTQ acronym and replaced with phrases such as the LGBT rights movement or LGBT civil rights. As Kara would say, celebrate every win.
On the 13th of February, the Australian Doctors Federation published a statement on gender-affirming medical interventions for children and young people, calling for a ban on all gender reassignment treatment in every Australian state and territory, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgery. They ask for a national debate or conversation on how to protect vulnerable adults too, up to the age of 25, and for doctors to stop using the OzPath guidelines in treatment. David Limbrick of the Libertarian Party in Victoria posted a response to Argentina's decree to prohibit gender interventions for minors, laying out the Libertarian position. He said, some people ask why prohibiting gender medicine for minors is justified under Libertarian philosophy. Our philosophy revolves around the concepts of consent and the harm principle. I do not believe it is possible to form consent for these procedures for minors, therefore intervention is justified. And he likens gender medicine to cosmetic medicine, only for adults, no claims of efficacy, and no taxpayer funding. And he finishes by saying, the reality is that puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and other procedures turn physically healthy children into lifelong patients. This is not like other medicine, which is mostly attempting to heal something. So Australia seems to be getting the most traction at the moment on the question of medicalising children, which is great. We're just not getting a lot of movement on other areas. The major parties are still holding the line in favour of intervention with children, or they're handballing the issue with the claim that the average person isn't concerned with it. Some exceptions include the Liberals in Western Australia and Queensland, but not yet at the federal level or in other states. New South Wales Parliament, its own hate speech bill, following on from the federal law passed last week. Like the federal law, it was motivated publicly by debates over anti-Semitism in Australia, but like the federal bill, it includes the additional clause that puts in the suite of kind of sex and gender related grounds that trigger hate speech provisions as well. And in the New South Wales bill, that is gender identity, intersex status, HIV or AIDS status, and sexual orientation. So that's as well as race and religion. The minister's statement, interestingly, only references race as a trigger. Australian Feminists for Women's Rights have launched a campaign in the lead up to the federal election this year, asking the major parties to commit to reviewing the Sex Discrimination Act in light of the 2013 changes that removed the meanings of woman and man. They have a website with basic information to educate the public and a tool for writing to MPs with a template letter. So you can visit restorewomensrights.org.au to have a look at that, and if you're in Australia, to use it to contact an MP. And lastly, the annual Brisbane Women's Liberation Conference is coming up again on IWD weekend. So that's the 6th to the 8th of March. Speakers include Renee Gerlich, Susan Hawthorne, Scarlett Moore, Carol Ann from the Lesbian Action Group, and Vaishnavi Sundar. There will be a showing of Vaishnavi's documentary Beyond the Looking Glass as well. So you can email IWD Brisbane Meanjin to attend. Thank you very much.
Okay, so there's been sort of like at least two kind of interesting news events in New Zealand this week, and one of them is we've been having Pride celebrations in New Zealand, and the Destiny Church sort of hit the headlines. They're a sort of conservative Christian organisation because they forced their way into the Te Atatu Peninsula Community Centre / library in Auckland, and performed a haka and made a lot of noise and caused a lot of fear and distress amongst the mothers and small children who were there, who were reportedly crying and reported hearing bangings on the door and walls and things like this. So they were pretty frightened by all that. And there's been a kind of differences of opinion amongst the sort of feminist community and amongst those gender critical people. And of course, the gender critical movement includes a wide range of political views, from conservative Christians through to radical feminists, and everything in between. So it's not surprising that there are differences of views on whether this was supported or not. There have been protests against the drag queen story time for a long time in New Zealand, and obviously it's not exactly a clear-cut issue of freedom of speech, because this is where potential harm could be done to children, both from the message that they could change their sex and also from the proximity to adult performers who in other parts of their lives are doing quite erotic performances. So there is a fear about the close connection with the children. So there's it's seen as a lack of safeguarding. So it's not a clear-cut freedom of speech issue, although the Free Speech Union does see it that way, and they describe this as a thug's veto being expressed. And there have been parallels drawn with what happened to the women at the Let Women Speak rally in 2023, when women were violently attacked by a mob, and a huge mob of 2,000 people. And again, the behaviour of the trans activists was described at that time by the Free Speech Union as a thug's veto as well. But others would say there's not really a parallel, except the state and the media and all the establishment expressing horror at the actions of Destiny Church, but they didn't really criticise the actions of the trans activists at Albert Park at all. So Destiny Church, as I said, it's a conservative Christian organisation. They're anti-gay, anti-lesbian, anti-bisexual. They opposed gay marriage with demonstrations at the time. They might have even opposed the homosexual law reform. I'm not quite sure of the back history of that, whether Destiny Church had that name or was around in those days. They want to support the sort of save the patriarchal family and get men in their sort of leadership domination roles again. So they're not feminists. So yeah, that hit headlines in any case. Now another important news item is that the police conduct, New Zealand Police Conduct Authority, NZPCA, has just released their report about the policing of Albert Park. What happened at Albert Park in March 2023, when 2,000 trans activists mobbed 200 women who were trying to speak at this Let Women Speak rally, when Kelly J. Keane had been invited as a speaker. And as everyone knows, that was absolutely a horrific and traumatic event for women. I mean, everyone saw it on the internet, but the mainstream media still hardly reported it at all at the time. And the report actually, if you read it carefully and you scroll down far enough, because the actual report about this whole event starts at page 77 and it's called Appendix A. So if you read it and you see that actually the NZPCA is extremely critical of what the police did, and basically says that they basically were completely inadequate in their response. That they were acting on flawed risk assessment in the first place. They were not recognising the risk, and they made poor decisions the whole way through and didn't respond to the pleas of the women for help. They just continued to stay in their vans and not come out and help them. So it's extremely critical of them. But this report is kind of buried in the overall report, which now is entitled Policing of Public Protests in New Zealand. And they add a couple of other reports as well about some Gaza protests. And so it's kind of buried and you hardly notice it. And what they've come up with is a recommendation that the police should have more powers, which seems to me to be completely illogical. But they want to bring in a law about public protests, which will require people, or at least heavily, or maybe at best encourage them, but at worst force them, making it mandatory, somewhere between those two, to notify the police about a month before they have an event. And if they don't notify, maybe they might be punished, or else they won't get little privileges, whereas those who will report it will get these privileges and get more protection. So the deal is, if you want protection from the police, you have to notify them a long time in advance. And furthermore, you have to do what they tell you, and the police can set the conditions on which they're allowed to have their event. So this comes across to me as a very draconian proposal, and it's kind of completely opposite to what I think would be a suitable response, because in fact, the Let Women Speak Women did notify the police several times in advance, and were basically ignored when they talked about the risk that they thought might be there. So although it's true that nobody knew exactly how bad that risk was going to be at the beginning, you know, a month beforehand, because the events that unfolded in Australia whipped up all the passion and hatred towards Kelly J. Keane, and so you know, lots of people were trying to stop her coming into the country, and politicians and judges and everyone had a great time saying how dreadful she was. And so this whole system whipped up this hatred and smearing of the women. But this bias has not been included in this IPCA report at all. It's like it never existed, and it's just, oh, the police made a mistake, they didn't realize how bad things were going to be, and so on. So and then they responded poorly, but there's nothing about the bias. So, you know, and I think that, you know, in today's climate, giving the state and police more powers, considering there is so much bias, as we know, against women who stand up for sex-based rights, I think that's would be quite a risk. And it's the same thing with the proposed hate crime legislation at the moment. I think that the fear of gender critical feminists is that this wouldn't be designed in an impartial way, and is likely to put women at risk. So there's that report which came out, which is interesting. And then a smaller news item is about rainbow crossings. And ironically, along with the drag queen story time events, which have, you know, been controversial for a number of years in New Zealand now, the rainbow crossings are also quite controversial. The councils around New Zealand love painting them to show their support for, you know, LGBTQ, etc. And they're actually not really legal as crossings. They're not legal crossings. There are laws in New Zealand that says crossings can only have white paint on them. I don't even think they have black, because I think the grey of the road makes the black line and the white is the paint. And so they're treated as sort of art objects on the street. But anyway, someone's now calling for a judicial review at the High Court as to the legality of these rainbow crossings, arguing that they could distract drivers, for example, and maybe cause accidents. So that's kind of interesting, because the Destiny Church, again, or else its associates and friends, have actually painted over a lot of these rainbow crossings, and then they've been accused of hate crimes, and the police have viewed it that way. But one time they wanted to prosecute Destiny Church for a hate crime for painting over a rainbow crossing, but they actually couldn't really do it, or it sort of stopped at some point, because it was kind of perceived that legally the council, who was their victim, was not a suitable victim to be designated a victim of a hate crime, because the council itself wasn't representing the NZ, whatever you call it, the rainbow community. So that kind of didn't succeed. But with these new hate crime proposals from the Law Commission, that's one of the things they're looking into, thinking, well, how could we manage to prosecute them for a hate crime for such a thing? So anyway, so that's the three events that I'm drawing attention to this week. Thank you.